what I learned in the financial services, which is everything's relationships. So you build a lot of relationships with a lot of brokers. And what you do is you don't retrade them because then they don't like to deal with you again. So you have to do your homework. This is the hard part, and underwrite things well. And what you have to do, that's the most important thing, is walk away about the vast majority of the time, but when people know what you're looking for, they'll communicate it. And if you have a solid track record, you can often get deals and not be the highest bidder because some of those other people in the market might not have the reputation that you have. So I think what you have to understand is reputation is everything, and it takes a career to build it in about 30 seconds to destroy. So whatever business you're in, that is your most important asset you have to protect at all costs.
Hey, I'm Bryan Wish, and welcome back to the One Away Show. Today's guest is Nick Bakish, an investor, entrepreneur, and longtime wealth strategist whose career has been shaped by resilience, reinvention, and a fierce respect for relationships. Nick shares how his early rejection from investment banking sparked an unexpected but formative path into wealth management, and how one key mentor and focus on process over outcome helped him build one of the top branches in Canada. From there, we explore how Nick transitioned into private investments in real estate, why he sees crisis as a signal, not a setback, and how he used timeless principles to build a modern investment firm with global reach. We also talk about climate impact, his passion for tennis, and why surrounding yourself with people you admire may be the best long-term investment of all. Let's get into it. Nick, welcome to the One Away Show.
It is a pleasure to be here, Brian. Thank you very much for having me.
Nick, what is the one away moment that you want to share with us today?
It's a great question, and I wish I had a great answer. Um, I would look at it as a continuous process as opposed to one away. So I kind of look at life as a constantly changing journey, but I think you come up with certain inflection points, and those are the things that you grow from. And so I would say some of my one-aways have been, changing paths that I've been on, whether it was going from a more proprietary, fun world when I was in wealth management to a more open architecture, independent. When I left wealth management to start my own firm was really, I think, kind of the biggest one. But pivoting from one specific asset class within that platform to going to new areas, it was also another. And then obviously there's personal things, with family and friends. But I don't look at things as one-offs. I look at them as a continual process of evolution, and looking at changes as ways to grow from both the good and the bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate kind of the holistic overview of just kind of career, and maybe how you've thought about career. Let me ask it to you like this. When you or were a young professional, like right out of school, right? Like, how are you thinking about life and career and like what you wanted for yourself in the world?
Yeah, that's a long time ago, and I could definitely remember it. I was in finance, so generally the typical path would kind of be in the investment banking, you know, type of financial services route.
Mm.
Which that would be another kind of one-off moments where didn't quite work out that way, and I ended up taking a more entrepreneurial route in the wealth management business. I was fortunate because there was a company that would pretty much take anyone, and I decided I would give it a shot. I wasn't afraid of sales and building relationships, and so after graduating from McGill with honors in finance, I ended up doing cold calling, something that definitely was not required as a prerequisite, but having that background kind of in the theoretical framework was very useful to speak in an educated way and grow a book of business and become independent from a perspective of controlling my own time and destiny. So worked out very well in the end.
Let's totally. I really appreciate the perspective. Sounds like a great opportunity to learn sales, but also get deeply entrenched in an industry in the financial services space. But like money in general to you, it something that you always wanted? Was it something that kind of growing up, like you saw lack of or deficit, or was abundant and you wanted to create a similar feature for yourself? Like what was the draw to maybe a career path that you've kind of been down on that has, where you've been able to really think about your financial future and the futures of others.
Yeah, I think the way I always thought about money is it shouldn't be the end goal to make me happy, but if I lacked it, I would be miserable. I think it's a great freedom enabler for time, and the ability to travel and have your own schedule, right? And if you're lacking that and you can't provide material necessities, and experience is even more important than that, then life is not as fruitful. So I think it's a tool to enable, and relying on it as its own ends mean is not necessarily the ideal. So therefore, that's kind of the point where I would say I would always fear lacking it more than I was focused on the joy of what it would bring me.
Awesome. No, I think it's a great perspective on just kind of at large and how it influenced kind of your career. When you talk to me a little bit, Nick, about the first job in the financial services space, kind of who it was with, kind of who what you were kind of set out to do, and kind of where that took you.
Yeah, so I started right out of the gates with a company called Investors Group. It's one of the biggest asset management companies in Canada, and it was very helpful because they had a good culture to learn from. In particular, the branch that I started out was the most successful branch in the company's history. So I was very fortunate to get the right mentors early on, and that was something I didn't want to waste. So I just kind of my thought process was if many others were able to succeed in that environment, the only reason I wouldn't would be if I wasn't working hard enough. And so my idea was just to work harder than everyone else, and then success would naturally come as a byproduct. And that's kind of the way it worked out. It was a lot of effort at the beginning. The outputs were not showing as much as the inputs, and I had a good mentor that said, "Focus first on the inputs, and then the outputs will follow." I'll always kind of had the idea of following a process and looking at that and be more process driven than results oriented, and things just naturally will happen in ways that you can't predict once you do that.
And I think there's a book called The Score Takes Care of Itself. It's a very similar kind of methodology around just focusing on the right inputs and ultimately kind of having the things show up around you that pay off. So like
Yeah, yeah, there's a good book, Atomic Habits, that kinda talks about
the time of
that. Yeah, yeah, and it's stuff I did naturally, but this guy was so good at actually putting it into writing that, some people will naturally kind of think that way, and others, they need to change their mindset. So, fortunately, I looked at little things of, changing in ways that, over the long term would make a big difference.
I mean, you spent over 10 years at Investors Group, and yeah, it sounds like you built out the top kind of portfolio and practice and branch under them. When you talk about those inputs and maybe some of those things that you learned early on, right? Whether that's the intangible traits, whether they were certain systems that you created, like do you reflect back on that journey and some of the foundational lessons, foundational moments, kind of what comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's just I think, good artists copy, great artists steal, and so the idea was people had already had models that worked, and I didn't wanna reinvent the wheel. And one of the things they did very well was, focusing less on the product and more on the relationship and the financial planning side, which I think is where the biggest difference comes from. It's not necessarily the performance of the investments, but it's the behavior of the investor, and not pretending to control things you can't. And so I think, more than anything, what was part of the success was a certain authenticity of, building out good relationships and creating good plans and sticking to them and then evolving as life changes and, being, adaptable.
Well, it sounds like you learned some good client relationship skills, and also were able to flex the financial muscles, and were able to make long term smart decisions in the market over time.
Yeah, there was a very good saying, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." Right? So, if you actually do, it comes to across, and then, things go in the right direction from there.
When you think about kind of the career, and you're kind of when you were building out this kind of the branch in the financial side, and you kind of got, let's just say, to the top spot, and you were kind of successful in that role. Like what were you thinking about in terms of like beyond the job? Like, what were things that, in terms of you were thinking about stepping stones, like what you wanted kind of next and kind of what you were aspiring to? Like, where did that initial path lead you?
Yeah, I mean, it was not, again, a one-off, but it was a slow process of experimenting and taking feedback from my experiences and then adjusting, right? So, obviously, most of my work originally was in public markets, and then through, again, importance of mentors and relationships, my branch manager, getting me into private investments and realizing there's a whole different world, and that world's not better or worse, it's just different, and, that over time became more interesting and part of my life as a focus to grow my professional, business.
So I mean, like on this note, let's say, I mean, maybe not to put you on the spot here, but let's just say, um, somebody, they had their money in just like very traditional investments. They didn't have a ton saved, but they just had a big kind of exit event or wealth event, right? Through their company. Like from your background and point of view and what everything you've learned in the markets, like what do you how would you think about allocating kind of cash and in different investments in like a potential long-term strategy? I know you're like you can't probably get too specific, but like how would you think about that if someone came to you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there are many answers to it. I'd always go to, obviously, the guru and the master, Warren Buffett, who makes it very simple. Just follow first rule number 1, which is to not lose money, and then rule number 2 is don't forget rule number 1. And so, that can be a lot more nuanced later when you think about things like inflation and purchasing power versus nominal dollars, right? But I would say someone that just comes into liquidity should take things slow, and not rush into anything, and whatever they're starting with, be prepared, for downside scenarios and, find out what is right for them. In the traditional kind of finance world, there's this modern portfolio theory. We'll talk about things like diversification and how it's important. And of course, that is the free lunch. But then there's the goals based investing world, which is completely different, where it says certain things like, concentration is not good, leverage is not good. But if you look at most people, how they create wealth, it is actually probably through concentration and leverage or both. And so I kind of changed over the years, looking at things from less of a kind of classical, standard economic theory of rational man to more goals based. This is intentional. I'm willing to take a risk on this. This is in a certain bucket. So if an investment has a purpose, I think that's what's important. And that purpose can be financial. It could be one of, a few things, maybe getting rich or staying rich. And they're very different types of investments. It could be aspirational. If you're focused on impact and you're more concerned about where your dollars are actually being invested. And that's not always about financials. So I think it's just more being intentional with what you're doing with your capital and how it can help you and not hurt you over time.
No, I love the answer and approach on like on an individual level. Yeah, I just read a book. I can't remember the name, even though I just finished it. It was by a guy named Logan Rankin in the real estate space. He's like mid 30s, owns 5,000 units. And it's just like this unbelievable growth story. And his book talks a lot about leverage and concentration, and obviously and real estate beating the market at like 30%, on average versus an S&P like 8 to 12% potentially returns. So my question for you is, you're at Group RMC now, or you're a partner, and it seems like the bulk of that work is within the real estate space on investing across different assets for families and different types of board people. What drew you to investing with a real estate focus, given what you learned on the financial planning space?
Yeah, well, my business partner made a lot of money in the asset class, so that's what got me interested, right? He started at a very interesting time. RMC stands for Ray Massa, so he was my mentor, and he started at a time that predated mine in the savings and loans crisis in Texas, when there was a financial crisis, and a company called the RTC Resolution Trust Corporation had to prevent the systemic risk from spreading and had a lot of bad assets eventually that had to shed. And, that's when he was doing his buying when things were very cheap and had a very lucrative exit to the late Sam Zell Equity Residential. And I think that framework helped when in Quebec we had our own crisis, and crisis is a terrible thing to waste. Um, There's a reason Bank of Montreal's in Toronto, and that's because of the separatism problem. And, when we had these mid-90s referendums, it scared away a lot of capital, and, you could do one of 2 things. You could, take off and run, or you could say, "This pricing is now extremely attractive, and there's a margin for error." And fortunately, that was the latter approach that we took, and, we did a lot of industrial back then, and I would say sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. It's not because we knew Amazon was gonna come along, it was just the cheapest thing, and we always believed in deep value and had a very successful exit to a REIT. And then, obviously, most recently in the office, there was a similar kind of existential moment where everyone thought the market was never going to come back. And as always, whenever you see headlines, that's when you should be looking at opportunity, because people don't tend to understand a word called nuance, that things are not all the same. And, with a flight to quality, there were good products in the right areas that created unique opportunities. And again, this just goes back to Warren Buffett. You want to be fearful when people are greedy, and greedy when they're fearful. So, having that ability to look at a long term approach is really the key in whatever asset class, whether it's real estate, whether it's stocks, whether it's credit. There's often dislocations, and the ability to take advantage of that is the key.
Love what you're saying. I love that Warren Buffett quote. I also want to double click on something you just said. Headlines equal opportunity, and it seems like there's these moments in just the Canadian market where you guys were able to seize opportunity and take advantage of things that others weren't seeing. Do you make them more tangible? Like, do you have any specific stories or an investment you can share, or just kind of bring that line to life, or that line about Warren Buffett about being greedy when people are fearful? Like, I'd love to maybe know more specifically how you've created opportunity for yourself in one of those moments.
Yeah. So, well, what happened was we sold our Canadian assets. And again, sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart. And it was 2006, and it's before the financial crisis happened. And we had no idea that this was around the corner of the Great Recession, right, of our lifetimes. But obviously, what happened was markets totally collapsed. And it was funny because the REIT that bought our assets also collapsed. I think it lost like 90% of its market cap, but we knew those assets intrinsically well. So we had a great way to buy them on the public market. And we just became, I think, amongst the largest shareholders, and had an even better return after. And this is when I got involved because my partner said, we love the US and we love Canada, but Canada didn't quite have the same experience where it was, it had like an oligopoly of banks that were able to withstand, their stress tests. And where in the US, they were free fall with credit frozen. And we said, well, this is probably the moment to go in, to our point. And that's when we did. And we went into a city called Fort Wayne, Indiana, which I would never have heard of before, but we just said, let's do our homework. And we couldn't find the deals we wanted on the coast. And so it's just an interesting example where GE Capital had financed a building. It cost about 25 million, and their loan, I think, was about 20, and the balance on the principal was about 17, and the developer couldn't keep it. And so they took it back on their books, like many financial institutions did, and they had to fire sale it. And that's when we acquired it. I think the cost was a little over 5, and the occupancy was 60%. And ironically, out of all companies in the world, we brought the occupancy up to 90% with GE Industrial, and that couldn't have worked out better. We refinanced, got our money back, and we're able to do some of these kind of smaller friends and family deal. And that was just because we were fortunate, because credit was frozen and we were somewhat liquid to go all cash in those scary moments. And with TARP and TALF and QE, credit eventually did come back. And those small deals that we were doing on our own disappeared. And that's kind of where we got into the bigger space after time. Yeah.
Wow. Super savvy, strategic, and so it's like opportunistic because you had cash also when others maybe didn't. One of the things that you're talking about is like, seeing opportunities, you're able to spot it, obviously take advantage in the moment. But I think a whole another part of it is like sourcing and knowing where to look and to like find the right deals. Like how what is for whether you're in real estate investing or other investing, like how what's your philosophy on kind of sourcing good opportunities and finding things that kind of make sense to like really take advantage on?
Great question. And I think it all goes back to what I learned in the financial services, which is everything's relationships. So you build a lot of relationships with a lot of brokers. And what you do is you don't retrade them, because then they don't like to deal with you again. So you have to do your homework. This is the hard part, and underwrite things well. And what you have to do, that's the most important thing, is walk away about the vast majority of the time, But when people know what you're looking for, they'll communicate it. And if you have a solid track record, you can often get deals and not be the highest bidder because some of those other people in the market might not have the reputation that you have. So I think what you have to understand is reputation is everything, and takes a career to build it and about 30 seconds to destroy. So whatever business you're in, that is your most important asset you have to protect at all costs.
Wow, so beautifully said about reputation, but also like I mean to build the relationship. It sounds like don't screw over any brokers or do things that piss them off, but also have like the strength and the courage to walk away from things that don't make sense for you. Given kind of let's just go back to your financial, the services days when you was kind of the core. Sounds like you're out meeting a ton of people. Harvesting maybe at much later dates. How like even deeper, so if it takes building great relationships to source great opportunities, like, how do you think about just relationship building in general? Like, what are you doing maybe even today, even back then, where you're getting in front of different relationships that could be, smart for you in the future?
And that's what the name of the game is. So I try to live by one rule, which is the no asshole rule. Life is very short, and if you surround yourself with people that you admire, then it'll be much more enjoyable. And I think this is where our business took a very interesting turn with our principal investing side, which was actually outside of real estate, with the idea to base them on relationships. And instead of looking at it kind of as a capital markets transactional type of thing, look at it as a long-term, permanent, generational partnership and not, what you're going to get in the short term and, what you're going to give up in the short term, but how everyone can benefit in the long term. And it's not something you can really quite map out other than just trying to build good karma and then somehow good things happen over time.
Yeah. So it sounds like I'm hearing you say is like, hey, let's build a relationship. This is a long term thing. It's not about like the short term hit or what you got to give up. It's really about, just letting good people around yourself and letting, the byproduct of that kind of take care of itself over time.
It's been the key to our success. If you could imagine being in office through everything that we went through, it has been a challenging few years. And if we didn't have the right partners and the right long term approach, we wouldn't be where we are right now. So I think it's just like investing. You have that long term mindset. It's what can get you through the tough times. And so I always tell people it's great to thrive, but what's even more important is to survive, right? And if you don't lose money, over time cycles change, and in real estate in particular, people are gonna not make it for one of two reasons: they're gonna run out of time, or they're gonna run out of money, right? So if you can put yourself in a position where you're well capitalized with time, you can get through cycles and come out the other side and flourish.
I love it. It's also like the sense of uh, a practicality as well to like how you've done things. And yeah, it reminds me a little bit about the book that Ray Dalio wrote called Principles and kind of his ways of doing things. That's I think like the first half of the book, and it's like, hey, these are the principles I live by, and you probably haven't done it perfectly through your life, but there's a series of things that shape your decision making that over time, no matter how bad things get, can keep you on your feet.
Absolutely, and they can get bad, and sometimes you have to remind yourself of those things.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not saying you have it all figured out. Just
No, that's for sure, and I certainly I've copied a lot of the stuff from others, so yeah.
yeah. Nick, what I'm just fun kind of getting technical on your way of doing things. So thanks for sharing it all. What when you think about like personal experiences, let's say beyond work, but like personal things that maybe have influenced like how you show up at work. Like what comes to mind, like getting to know maybe Nick the person and the core of kind of who you are. Like what are any experiences or things that you kind of carry with you to this day that have shaped you?
I mean, I just, again, wanna surround myself, whether they're investors, whether they used to be clients, whether they're colleagues, whether they're business partners, just with people that I admire, and then, as Warren Buffett says again, you tap dance to work if you're doing what you love, right? And I know what I don't like, and so what I try to do in my work is delegate as much as I can for things that I'm not good at, so I can focus on the very few things that I am good at. And, if I'm doing, where my special skill set helps me and not things that I have no extra advantage, and I just find the satisfaction of work to be much higher. And if you're around the right people, it's just, you're in a fortunate situation where you're in a type of world where capital allocation is a luxury to be able to consider.
Well, on that note of like doing things that you're good at, not good at, um, I just did this exercise with a coach we've been working with to our team, obviously for me, and he had me do this 4 quadrant exercise. Like, what do you love that you're good at, don't love but you're good at, and like what you're not good at and don't love, and something like one other quadrant. And so it's about like efficiency and time. So when you think about the things like the quadrant of like what you love to do and you're good at, like what are those things?
I think I love growing and building systems, not always implementing the systems, but creating a framework to proceed, right? And so a lot of that's just when you're implementing what you've already created and realizing what's not good, changing it. And so I think just looking at things in terms of systems is really important because a certain pattern recognition kicks in and then you just know how to deal with things that happen. And I think that's what expertise is,
Awesome.
which is why AI will probably make a lot of what we do redundant at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, that's so interesting, right? Like I've been playing with AI a lot, and I mean, I think it's fascinating. It's fascinating for our world. It's probably very fascinating for your world. Given given that it seems like you're just, I mean, I feel like we'd be fellow friends in the same city, but like it seems like you're super relational. You have a human kind of touch and gravitas that I would say maybe 95% of the world doesn't have. So like with AI, right? It's taking away obviously so much of just the tactical stuff. But like, how do you think it's going to really enhance maybe some of the core qualities that you've developed?
Well, I think it will make us much more efficient, right? And if we free more time, then that's a good thing. Because I think one thing that is hard to, replace with AI is true relationships. Although I think scary that is actually happening where people are falling in love with bots and things like that. So clearly, what that shows is there's a human need for that, right? But I think in general, most of the people would prefer that to be with a real human on the other side, whether it's their life partner, whether it's their investing partner, whether it's their advisor. But I think it is what it is, and it's going to have an impact. And we just don't know. I mean, look at how fast it's progressing with DeepSeek and the costs, how it's coming down. And so I think we're still in early innings, and there's that saying, it's not going to replace people, but people that use it will replace other people. Probably true, but I think also it will replace people to a certain extent. And we're all farmers before, and we just have to be really ready for what's going to happen because I don't think we quite know.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's funny. I was playing with it this weekend. Just I kind of like just play with it, screw around, and yeah, sometimes too. And I had it like be like, what? Give him all the prompts I put into it. I was like, given what you know about me, like, what kind of wife should I have? And like describes the person. Then I'm like, well, like make a picture, and it makes this picture. And I'm like, well, where do I find her? It was actually like pretty like how I would think about doing it, but it was like in front of me. I'm like, oh, this is like amazing. Not that I fell in love with my AI bot, but like it was like it's like wow, like I mean, even for stuff that's like fun and playful. I mean, I'm using it a lot with work, but I agree with you. The fact in like 2 years it's gotten this far. It is. Yeah, I'm scared half the day in the sense of like, what is this going to mean in the next 3 years? And I think it's super interesting, and the technology I've just never seen anything like it. So seems like you've had similar experiences. So.
Yeah, and it's just an example where everyone that tells you they know things. I mean, who was talking about large language models like a few years ago, right? And now it is what everyone talks about. But now it was just announced that Microsoft figured out a way to create a new state for quantum chips, right? What does that mean for all these things, right? Like these are hard to fathom, and so it will be interesting. That's what we can certainly say, but scary at the same time. With
Nick, as you look like, let's say the next 10 years, right? What are things that like you're thinking about looking at, kind of things that you're after, and maybe have some goals around professionally?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting our evolution where we went from a group of small friends and family. This was originally not formal, it was less than 100 million, it was not sophisticated. When we're talking about AI, we would use napkins as our technology, rather than blowing it up a group. So now, the assets are growing close to 3 billion. And this has all been done without institutional capital. Family offices have been our main partners, and we've started to successfully work with the wealth management business, which was my background with RIAs and MFOs. So I just think we're scratching the surface. But I think what's the most interesting is none of the things we did were really new. We just took old concepts that worked and applied them for new groups. So the direct co-investing, we copied our Canadian pensions. They figured out 30 years ago that if you go direct and you don't pay the 2 and 20 to the big PE funds, it's just the math. You're going to get a better return without the waterfall. And now we've launched new businesses like ground leases and charging rents on the land without taking the risk. This is the monarchy of the UK. They've been doing this for 5 centuries. And so taking these time tested concepts and bringing them to um, new partners is very interesting, and it's been exciting. And I don't think we're going to run out of new opportunities. And I think, the world has become quite interested in alternatives and under allocated for the most part. And this is a very unique way to diversify, I would say.
It seems like what you're saying is like, hey, this was never intended to get like this big. It was a kind of a small thing that's like really exploded in our face. And like, oh, like as I think about the future, it could get a lot bigger, and kind of want to be at the forefront of it. So it seems like it was a much bigger vision maybe than than what you initially anticipated.
Yeah, it's just kind of originally grew from, when my business partner's son went to Wharton, is doing secondaries and private equity, originally Exxon, then became Arden, and he figured out what we were doing could actually be a real business. We didn't even think about it that way. But he was saying, these are really good returns. We should partner with others. And, he kind of figured out the structures. And then we've adapted to new things, from land banking to private credit to lease bifurcations. And, there's no end to where the creative mind can take you, if you have the right relationships to grow in these new areas. And I think we've done the hardest thing, which is build the kind of framework to start growing.
Yeah, it seems like you also have the like relationship capital and you have the assets to do it. Very
Yeah,
good.
you gotta have scale, right? It's very difficult if you don't have scale to do things. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Nick, what I mean, just out of curiosity, if like you weren't doing any kind of investing in this way, they didn't have the financial, obviously you have the background that you have, but like let's just say tomorrow, um, you had to switch careers, you had to go completely different career path, just like Mother Nature, the different kind of story in store for you. Like what would be your first inclination of what you'd want to do?
Well, it's funny you say Mother Nature. I was the past president of Sierra Club of Canada, so I probably focus more on that part of what my passions are, conservation, and something I'm doing right now with the Climate Solutions Prize in Canada, and we're turned it globally, working with a lot of different impact opportunities and bringing capital and startups together. And it is tangentially, but just where I could help focusing in that area would be my passion and priority.
Interesting. I have a good person for you to meet after this.
Well, you've already introduced me some, so I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm just trying to help increase your relational capital. It's good. I'm figuring out what you like.
I think that's the best kind of capital. it,
Especially when
it
you have good,
appreciates over time, and yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Doesn't inflate away like other things. Yeah,
Right, long-term assets, right?
that's right. Yeah.
Could be a fun book, like your most like your best long-term assets are people or something.
I think honestly, you invest. That's again, Warren Buffett. He just says everything, so there's nothing new. But you can invest in one thing is yourself, right? And part of that's learning from others. And there are so many great people to learn from. So just continue to find them. Yeah.
Tell me, on this note of impact or climate and sustainability, kind of tell me more about your interest here, like in this space. Like, why is this important to you? Like, what are you looking at? Like, just help us understand.
Well, I mean, if you look at what's happened recently, from wildfires where I am to, massive hurricanes that have decimated cities like, on the west coast of Florida and Asheville. I mean, I think there's no question that the world we're living in is changing, and I don't think we can stop it now, but we can try to minimize the damage we're doing and adapt. And, to not be part of that is just, I don't understand how that could even be an option.
Yeah, no, totally. I completely I'm with you. It's devastating what we've seen, and obviously where the world is going, and yeah.
Yeah, our minds are just programmed to think linearly, right? And this is not a linear change. And so, once you hit a new state, like, things get really weird fast, and this is what's happening as well.
Is there anything kind of in the world of Nick that we should touch on before we wrap?
Well, I love tennis, although I'm not the greatest player, that's for sure, because I never played competitively younger, but I like that because I can actually improve, and, it's really an exciting time in that sport with Alcaraz after you see the big 3 that have dominated for 2 decades, and, what's happening with Sinner was kinda crazy, but just how these 2 emerge and, total digression, but that's pretty cool, things like meditation and, are really important to me because, that goes back to just, working on yourself, and that's been something that I've enjoyed, but, again, I think, having the right people around you that you can learn from and grow and, in different sports and different things is just always makes life more interesting, and funny enough, tennis, I don't know if people are aware, but it makes you live 10 years longer, so everyone's obsessed about longevity now. There's a pretty easy little, thing to pick up on.
Similar to you, I love tennis, and I got the same with this guy. I started taking lessons, and I hurt my back, so I'm like 10% away from a hit. But I had 2 injuries that kind of came out of nowhere from early days in my life. And anyways, I'm so excited to get back to the tennis courts because I loved the sport. It was like so intellectually like it's stimulating, it's dynamic, right? It's not just like you're throwing a football. It's like you got to really think, and the physicality. One of my other friends from college, he's become like the voice of a new sport called chess boxing, where you like go through rounds of playing chess and then kind of boxing, and you kind of it's like the physical. Anyways, it's not tennis, but like I think the sports that
Sounds like tennis though, because you have that physical and that component to it, right? So,
that's what that yeah you connect.
yeah, so that is a great analogy, just play tennis, but I mean, yes, when you get the mind and the body, it's pretty interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and I can totally see, like, how that would
But
relate.
you can also see when people are young and they're hardwired, and how the brain works, like, just can't get to that level, but it's always fun to practice and improve, and getting that feedback is super addictive and healthy in a way that, you want. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally, and tennis is just like such a strategic sport, and so, I found
Well, and then like many other things, the biggest opponent you're facing is not across the net, but it's in your mind.
there's a tennis book I read, I just moved, so I'm looking for it on my shelf. It's a book on the whole mental side of tennis and, like, how
Yes, I
flow.
yeah.
It's a famous book, but, it's great. It's, really good. Um, alright, before we wrap, what are, like, three books you'd recommend before, to send us home?
I guess I brought up Atomic Habits. That would certainly be one. Um, The Intelligent Investor. That's a good one by Ben Graham. If you don't want to read Security Analysis, which is the longer version, and say Principles by Dahlia. That's a great one. Yeah.
Well, Nick, this has been super fluid. I really appreciate you spending time. I know we're wrapping a little early. I just feel like we have a really good interview here.
Thank you for having me on my first ever podcast.
It was fun. So, yeah.
Brian, you're a good guy. I really appreciate all this. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The One Away Show with Nick Bakish. What stood out most was Nick's ability to see beyond the surface, whether it's markets, mentorship, or moments of crisis. His story is a reminder that great careers aren't built in straight lines. They are shaped by self-awareness, strategic pivots, and showing up with consistency over time. From finance to real estate impact, Nick brings a rare mix of humility, clarity, and principle-driven action. If this episode sparked something for you, feel free to share it or leave a quick review. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time, invest wisely, build patiently, and surround yourself with people who make you better.